Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. Thank you for joining us this evening. As always, we've got that phone number, website, and email address at the bottom of the screen there. Those are your best ways to get a forecast outside of our show, as well as contact us to give us any feedback or comments you have. So if you ever want a forecast over the phone, you can dial 1-800-472-0391. You can also visit us on our website, weather.gov/Alaska, for a forecast on the web, or email us at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov to let us know if you like the show or have any suggestions. We are looking at a red flag warning for tomorrow for the Mat-Su Valley. Expecting hot, dry, and windy conditions. It hasn't been particularly dry recently, but those really fine fuels are starting to dry out, so we could still see some threat of any fires that do get started tomorrow afternoon and evening during the hottest part of the day could spread quickly due to those strong winds. So if you are in the Mat-Su Valley area, it's a good day to make sure that you are not doing anything that could start a fire. We don't want to get out of hand. Taking a look at our satellite imagery for today, our main feature is low pressure that is just south of the Panhandle. We can see that circulating in a counterclockwise direction. We can also see a cluster of clouds just off the northern Panhandle, off the Yakutat coast essentially. And that's going to be some convection that we're seeing this afternoon. Could be some thunderstorms in that area. So if we look at today's surface chart, we can see that area in the northern Gulf is looking at thunderstorms with that convection this afternoon. We have our low pressure system south of the Panhandle. That's going to be bringing showers into the southern Panhandle today. We also have a chance of thunderstorms across the eastern Brooks Range for this afternoon and evening, with rain and showers through much of the rest of the Brooks Range and some rain possible for the central North Slope. We've got showers through the southern interior, stretching down into the northern Alaska Peninsula this afternoon and evening, and a mix of rain and fog for the Aleutians, with high pressure generally in command over the Bering Sea. For tonight, we'll have that low pressure continuing eastward south of the Panhandle, so showers continuing for much of the Panhandle tonight, with showers also for the southeastern interior as well as the Brooks Range. High pressure still over the Bering Sea, with ridging stretching up the west coast, so we'll see fog development on the North Slope tonight, as well as the Chukchi Sea coast, the immediate tip of Seward Peninsula down through St. Lawrence Island, and also fog for the YK Delta and into the northern Alaska Peninsula tonight, with those light winds with that high pressure in the area. Rain and a combination of rain and fog remaining tonight for the Aleutians, and dry conditions for much of the interior as well as south central. For Thursday, we still have that low pressure system starting to weaken a little bit, but we'll still see showers for the Panhandle again on Thursday. Some chance of thunderstorms for the southeastern interior and some showers for the eastern Brooks Range. That fog that develops tonight across the North Slope, the Chukchi Sea coast, parts of Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, might not actually clear out completely on Thursday, so maybe still some foggy conditions in those areas on Thursday afternoon. It does look like the fog should clear out from the YK Delta though, with even some sun possible Thursday afternoon there. High pressure weakening and starting to get shoved a little bit south as we have our next low pressure coming in from the west over the Kamchatka Peninsula. So we'll see rain and fog out ahead of that occluded front in the Aleutians for Thursday. And Friday, we have our low still sitting in the eastern Gulf, still bringing showers with a trough to the Panhandle area. Also, still some showers possible for the southeastern interior, although we don't have any thunderstorms in the forecast for Friday afternoon. And then our big feature to the west is going to be that low pressure system starting to weaken, but still with a trough with it. So we'll see rain as well as some fog in the Aleutians out ahead of that, with rain starting to move into the eastern Bering, including the Yukon Delta and the Seward Peninsula by Friday afternoon. Taking a look at temperatures for Thursday morning, looking at the Panhandle, we've got upper 40s to about mid 50s for Thursday morning. South Central, upper 40s to about low 50s, lots of mid to upper 40s across the interior. Cooler as always for the North Slope with some mid 30s to around 40 degrees. And then also cooler along the Chukchi Sea coast and the north side of the Seward Peninsula. Temperatures around 40 to the low 40s. Warmer for the Alaska Peninsula and YK Delta areas, mid 40s to low 50s for Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon, we'll see a warming trend across much of the interior, with our warmest temperatures in the Mat-Su Valley, where we have that red flag warning in effect. We could see some temperatures approaching 80 in the Mat-Su Valley. Looks like Talkeetna 77, the warmest temperature on the map for Thursday afternoon. Around 70 to low 70s across a lot of the Yukon Delta, the Yukon Flats, that should be, as well as 70s for the northern Alaska Peninsula, 60s for the Panhandle, 50s for the Aleutians, and just mid to upper 40s for the North Slope for Thursday afternoon. As we head into Friday morning, we are looking at not a lot in the way of change for low temperatures, at least. For the North Slope, a little bit warmer, upper 30s to even some mid 40s for the North Slope on Friday morning. Still a lot of mid 40s to upper 40s for the interior on Friday morning. A little bit warmer for the Chukchi Sea coast as well as the north side of the Seward Peninsula for Friday morning, with some mid 40s to around 50 degrees for that area. 50s, low 50s that should be for the south central area, a little bit cooler for portions of the Alaska Peninsula in the upper 40s, and some upper 40s for the Aleutian chain. For Friday afternoon, we continue with that warming trend, again with the Mat-Su Valley looking like the warmest area. Talkeetna 81 degrees forecast for Friday afternoon. Still warm across the interior, lots of 70s to low 70s from the Kenai Peninsula all the way north to the Yukon Flats, and then southwest through the northern Alaska Peninsula, even 70 degrees at Kodiak for Friday afternoon. For the Panhandle, still fairly mild, upper 50s to low 60s, looks like 67 at Skagway. And for the Aleutians, in the 50s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to a look at your aviation forecast. For Thursday morning, we expect IFR conditions along much of the North Slope, in fact, the entire area north of the Brooks Range just about. Also some IFR conditions along the immediate west coast of the YK Delta, including St. Lawrence Island and down into the Bering Sea a bit, reaching all the way down to the immediate north coast of the Alaska Peninsula. Also IFR conditions for much of the southern Bering and down through the Aleutians, and a small area of the eastern Gulf stretching just up into the Panhandle. MVFR conditions for pretty much the rest of the Panhandle, as well as the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains and much of the Yukon Delta. For Thursday afternoon, we'll see improvement along the North Slope with just some MVFR conditions hugging the coast there. MVFR conditions, though, developing across the Seward Peninsula with IFR conditions developing for the western half of the Seward Peninsula. IFR conditions continuing for much of the Bering Sea and spreading eastward up the Aleutian chain. MVFR conditions continuing for the southern portions of the Panhandle. For Friday morning, we'll see some IFR conditions returning to the eastern half of the North Slope, as well as the St. Lawrence Island area south into the Bering and much of the Aleutians. Also some IFR for the northern Gulf, but not making it to any land areas. MVFR continuing for the southern portion of the Alaska Panhandle, as well as the West Coast for Friday morning. And Friday afternoon, not much improvement for the West Coast. MVFR still for the entire West Coast, as well as IFR conditions for the western point of Seward Peninsula down through the Yukon Delta. MVFR conditions developing for the northern Panhandle on Friday afternoon and continuing for the southern Panhandle, and IFR conditions continuing for much of the Aleutians and into the southern Alaska Peninsula. Pass conditions on Thursday, Anaktuvuk Pass looking like MVFR Thursday morning, improving to VFR on Thursday afternoon. Same at Adigan Pass, MVFR in the morning, improving to VFR in the afternoon. Lake Clark and Merrill Passes, both VFR, Rainy Pass VFR, and Windy Pass VFR on Thursday. Isabel Pass VFR on Thursday as well. Mentasta Pass MVFR in the morning, improving to VFR in the afternoon. Tanita Pass VFR on Thursday, and Portage Pass VFR on Thursday. Also, Chilkoot and White Passes both expected to be VFR conditions on Thursday. For freezing levels, we've got our main warm air coming up from the south over the western Aleutians. We've got freezing levels as high as 16,000 feet on the map here, just south of the Aleutian chain, 10,000 feet over the west coast, about 8,000 feet over the north slope, and about 8,000 feet for much of the interior, as well as the Panhandle for Thursday morning. Icing on Thursday, just some isolated moderate icing over the northern Gulf above about 8,000 feet for Thursday, but over land areas we're not expecting any kind of significant icing. For jet stream winds on Thursday, we have our main jet north to south from about the Kenai Peninsula south into the Gulf. Wind speeds increasing as we go south from about 85 to 95 knots. That's actually going to be on the west side of a low pressure system that's almost completely further south in the Gulf off the map here. We've got a secondary jet over the western Aleutians from about 85 to 100 knots out of the west and southwest. 9,000 foot winds. We've got low pressure centered just off the southern Panhandle, with a peak of about 55 knots of wind out of the southeast coming into the southern Panhandle itself, decreasing to about 40 knots over the central Panhandle out of the east. Just 5 to 10 knots over much of the mainland, with a couple of peaks around 20 knots around the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains, as well as another peak over the Alaska Peninsula. High pressure over the west coast means light winds there, and light winds continuing through much of the Aleutians. For 3,000 foot winds on Thursday, we still have our low pressure system just off the Panhandle, 45 to 55 knot winds out of the east on the north side of that low, impacting the southern Panhandle. High pressure in the Bering Sea, so not much in the way of winds there, just some peaks at about 20 knots from the Alaska Peninsula up to the Kenai Peninsula. And for turbulence on Thursday, we do have a chance of some isolated severe turbulence with those strong winds over the southern Panhandle below about 6,000 feet.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and today I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Uccellini, the Director of the United States National Weather Service. Welcome back to Alaska, sir.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Thanks. Prior to being the leader of the National Weather Service, your work included an extensive look at snowstorms across the northeastern United States. These are the types of storms that can bring some of the country's largest cities to its knees. Tell me a little bit about your fascination with snow.
Well, as far back as I can remember, I've always been interested in weather, growing up as a kid on Long Island, New York, and was particularly fascinated by snowstorms, why they occurred. The distribution of snow was very varied across the entire region, the rain-snow line. all those things fascinated me right from the get-go. And I was interested in knowing how they worked, how the forecast worked, or more often than not, didn't work one way or the other. And that drove me, that interest continued to build and drove me through high school right into college, wanting to be a meteorologist.
Okay, that's a fascinating story, and I think every meteorologist has a weather story like that in some way.
Right.
Due to Alaska's size and proximity to the North Pole, sometimes it's difficult to detect and analyze the weather patterns over Alaska. What's the National Weather Service doing to improve that weather detection?
Well, observations in this type of environment is a big challenge, whether it's from space or from what we call in situ observations from the ground or within the systems. Clearly, satellites have been playing an increasing role in providing the big picture, not only from a visual sense in what you see is occurring, but also from providing the data for numerical models that then are used to actually predict the weather. Alaska is actually pretty well positioned with respect to polar orbiting satellites, since you get a faster return of those satellites over your particular area. And in fact, the polar satellite system is the backbone for the observations that we use in our models, especially our global models, and they're particularly important for observing weather features that affect Alaska.
Alaskans live and die by the weather every day, and one of the strategic goals of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the National Weather Service is to develop a more weather-ready nation. What does it mean for Alaskans to be weather-ready?
Well, the strategic outcome is based on people being ready, responsive, and therefore resilient to the increasing threats to extreme weather events. Those threats are related to not only the nature of the events, but the fact that we're becoming more vulnerable to them as we have more people, more infrastructure that could be affected by these events. So we have to ensure that the observations we make for situational awareness, the forecasts we make for people to take the proper responses are connected to people's actions, the response to these events, so that they will be more resilient to what's facing them. You know, there are examples with respect to hurricanes. More people living along the coastline takes longer to evacuate. We have to make better forecasts with longer lead times, but we also have to communicate the threat so people will actually take action to avoid those storms. Up here you have, as in other parts of the United States, an increasing threat related to fire. As there are more people living in fire-prone areas, we have to ensure that our forecasts are good, that we don't have false alarms that make people not react to the forecast when in fact they should. But we also have to be able to communicate the threat and make sure that we're working with the partners in the emergency management community so that communities and right down to individuals will actually take the proper responses in the face of these events. So that's the strategic goal. There are a lot of challenges for us in terms of improving forecasts, but also improving our communication skills and linking with the emergency management communities that are actually out there trying to protect lives and mitigate property loss.
So a huge partnership effort going forward.
That's one of the important keys for the success of meeting the strategic goal.
Okay. One of the things you're talking about was understanding the weather information we're getting back from the computers, weather modeling, and you did a lot of work with that in some of your prior positions with the Environmental Prediction Center there, the National Center for Environmental Prediction. What can you tell us about recent improvements in that weather modeling? And you were using the polar orbiters as kind of a source of information that started that process.
Well, you know, first of all, we have to recognize that everything you see, you read and hear about weather, climate, or ocean forecasts are all driven by numerical models. Now, it really has been the revolution in our forecast process in the last part of the 20th century. The success of that numerical enterprise is based on three factors: big computers, global data, not just local data, but you have to have a global data set, and then the models themselves, the science that's behind the models and in running the models in an operational mode. So we're working to improve all three of those components. We upgraded our computers last year. We're going through another upgrade even as I speak. We'll be upgrading from 200 trillion calculations per second to 700 trillion calculations per second by January of 2015. This increase in the computer will allow us to run what we call Earth system models. It's not just the atmosphere, it's the atmosphere, ocean, ice, which is obviously very important up here, and land models that are all coupled together at higher resolution. So you need the big computers, you need the science that allows us to run these models and run them in a parallel mode, and that they're coupled so that the ocean effects could affect the atmosphere and vice versa, as an example. And then the global observations are absolutely critical, and over the last 20, 30 years they've become more dependent upon the satellite systems, and especially the polar orbiting satellites, which help drive the observations needed for those models, whether they be atmospheric observations, land, ice observations. We're deriving more and more of that from satellites now that feed into these models and produce forecasts with extended lead times. Now out, for extreme events especially, we're seeing much improved forecast out in the 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8-day range, which gets us back to Weather Ready Nation, because if you're going to get ready for a storm event, you want those consistent forecasts approaching that event from day 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, so you can take the actions several days in advance that can help mitigate the property loss and protect your livelihood.
Okay, all part of the mission of protecting life and property. Dr. Uccellini, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it, and speaking to Alaskans and sharing how the National Weather Service is working for Alaska and the nation. Wish you safe travels around the 49th. Enjoy your time here, sir. And for Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for a look at your marine forecast. Starting out with the sea ice edge, we're continuing to see the ice edge in the Chukchi Sea and Beaufort Sea retreat. And that trend is expected to continue through the rest of this week and into next week as we have increasing southerly winds, especially in the Chukchi Sea. We've been seeing southerly winds in the Beaufort Sea. So expect that ice edge to retreat another 20 to 30 nautical miles to the north probably by next Monday. Taking a look at winds and seas for southeast on Thursday, we've got low pressure just south of the Panhandle, which is bringing some stronger winds into that eastern Gulf waters. So winds out of the southeast and east, 35 knots just in the furthest east portion of the Gulf off the Panhandle, decreasing as we head a little bit further north in the Gulf, 15 to 25 knots further north. And in those inside waterways on Thursday, 15 to 25 knots with some gusts up north in Lynn Canal to 35 knots for Thursday. For Friday, winds coming down, so we'll see our highest winds about 20 knots. Also winds shifting to more out of the north, so 10 to 20 knots for the Gulf and 5 knots over the southern inside waterways to about 20 knots out of the north for the northern waterways on Friday. Seas over the Gulf 6 to about 10 feet and 2 to 5 feet for the inside waterways, so still elevated a bit for the seas on Friday. South central winds and seas on Thursday, we're looking at 10 to about 25 knots of wind, and that's generally going to be out of the northwest. So 15 to 25 knots over the Gulf with about 4 to 5 foot seas, and 10 to 15 knots with 2 foot seas in Cook Inlet. For Friday, seas coming up just a little bit for the Gulf to about 4 to 6 feet, coming up the most in that northern Gulf area. Winds pretty consistent, still about 10 to 20 knots for the Gulf, 10 to 15 knots for Cook Inlet, about 15 knots out of the northwest for Prince William Sound. Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island areas on Thursday, we've got westerly and northwesterly flow 15 to 20 knots with 4 to 6 foot seas on the Gulf side and 3 to 4 foot seas on the Bering side. Looking ahead into Friday, still 15 to 20 knots, still pretty much out of the west with a little bit of northwesterly flow as well. 4 to 5 foot seas on the Gulf side and 3 foot seas on the Bering Sea side. Thursday for the Aleutian chain, 10 to 15 knot winds across most of the Aleutians, but the exception will be the western Aleutians with southerly winds at 30 knots as we have our next system approaching from the west. Seas 4 to 5 feet on the south side of the Aleutians and 2 to 4 feet on the north side. We do have 6 foot seas associated with those stronger winds in the western Aleutians. For Friday, we have winds and seas coming up pretty much across the board as we get that system moving closer. So we'll have more southerly flow, 15 to 20 knots, peaking about 25 knots for the western Aleutians, and 3 to 7 foot seas on the south side, 2 to 5 feet on the north side, and about 8 feet for the western Aleutians on Friday. For the west coast on Thursday, we're looking at 10 to 15 knot winds, generally some westerly flow, but some varying directions as far as north or south, and we'll see seas 2 to 3 feet for the entire west coast on Thursday. Winds and seas coming up a bit on Friday. In fact, seas coming up significantly in some areas to 6 feet down by the Pribilofs and to 9 feet just south of St. Matthew Island. Winds 15 to 25 knots generally, 10 knots on Friday in Norton Sound. Thursday for the Arctic coast, 10 to 15 knots out of the east for the North Slope, 10 to 20 knots generally out of the south for the Chukchi Sea coast. And on Friday, 15 to 20 knots out of the east for the North Slope, and winds increasing like we talked about with the ice edge in the Chukchi Sea to 15 to 20 knots out of the south. For tonight's weather, we've got that low pressure system off the Panhandle. That's going to be bringing showers into the Panhandle as well as those winds over the eastern Gulf. Land areas will also see some breezy conditions for the southern Panhandle. Otherwise, pretty quiet weather. We've got fog developing for the North Slope and the West Coast. Thanks so much for watching Alaska TV Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.